Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're diving straight into the sheer mechanics of biology. If you've ever just stopped to marvel at how living systems manage to keep the lights on day after day, well, you're in exactly the right place, because we're breaking down the absolute fundamentals.
To power those absolutely crucial life processes like respiration and reproduction, we need fuel. But how do completely different biological systems, from a tiny single cell all the way up to a complex human being, actually harvest it? It's a universal puzzle that connects literally every living entity on the planet.
So here's our roadmap for today. We'll start with the fuel for life, then look at making versus taking food, zoom in on microeating with the amoeba, and wrap up with the human digestive journey.
Okay, part 1, the fuel for life.
At its core, nutrition is really just the method an organism uses to secure the building blocks it needs to survive. Every single time you eat, you're engaging in this fundamental process, extracting materials right out of your environment to keep your internal engines running. It is the absolute prerequisite for every other biological function out there.
Moving right along to part 2, making versus taking food.
Nature actually splits survival into a massive fundamental divide. On one side, you've got the autotrophs. These are the makers who synthesize their own food completely from scratch using inorganic sources. On the other side, the heterotrophs, the takers, who must derive their meals from other living things. Simply put, you're either building your own meals or you're borrowing them from someone else.
Let's look at those makers first. Green plants use a remarkably efficient recipe: carbon dioxide, water, sunlight, and chlorophyll. Using just those 4 basic ingredients, they somehow manage to convert raw light energy into chemical energy, creating carbohydrates and exhaling oxygen for the rest of us. It's a total game changer.
Now, if you're a taker, you've basically got 3 strategies to choose from. You can be saprotrophic and feed on decay, kind of like fungi or mushrooms. You can be parasitic, siphoning nutrients straight off a living host. Or you can be holozoic, meaning a whole organism is taken in and consumed. And amazingly, this holozoic category is where both microscopic amoebas and complex humans find themselves.
Which brings us to part 3, microeating and the amoeba.
Imagine trying to eat a whole meal without a mouth. Sounds impossible, right? Well, the amoeba pulls this off by releasing pseudopodia, which literally translates to false feet. These tiny projections stretch out, completely surround their food, engulf it into a temporary little bubble called a vacuole, digest it right there in their cytoplasm, and then just push the waste back out.
And here's the wild part. Every single meal the amoeba eats follows an unbreakable 5-step playbook: ingestion of the food, digestion in the vacuole, absorption into the cell, assimilation to actually use that energy, and finally egestion to expel the waste. These 5 rules govern all holozoic life, no exceptions.
So, bridging the gap between this microscopic blob and our own incredibly complex human anatomy reveals a brilliant biological secret. The scale changes, sure, but the underlying logic doesn't budge an inch. Let's see how that works in part 4, the human digestive journey. For us, that very first ingestion step requires some heavy machinery. Inside the buccal cavity, or, your mouth, teeth cut and grind the food while a muscular tongue circulates the mixture. And here's a fascinating detail. Your saliva contains an enzyme called salivary amylase, which starts chemically dismantling carbohydrates before the food even reaches your throat. Once it travels down the food pipe, it hits the J-shaped stomach, which unleashes a really harsh chemical triad for digestion. Hydrochloric acid creates an intensely acidic environment, so the enzyme pepsin can kick off the heavy breakdown of proteins. And to prevent your stomach from literally digesting itself in all that acid, it smartly coats its own inner walls in a protective layer of mucus.
But before the final harvest, we need some serious chemical reinforcements. The liver, the body's largest gland, steps in to produce bile juice to obliterate fats. Meanwhile, the leaf-like pancreas releases insulin and glucagon to perfectly calibrate exactly how much superfuel ends up in our blood.
Then the food hits the winding tract of the small intestine, featuring the duodenum, jejunum, and ileum. This is the absolute powerhouse of the system. A staggering 99% of digestion is finalized right here. Proteins are fully dismantled, fats are dissolved by that bile, and the fuel we've been tracking all along is finally ready to be pulled into the body.
And this is exactly where step 3, absorption, kicks in. The small intestine is lined with microscopic, finger-like projections called villi. They act almost like a highly efficient, shaggy carpet, drastically increasing the surface area to aggressively absorb every last nutrient into your bloodstream for step 4, assimilation. And finally, whatever can't be utilized is expelled in step 5, egestion.
When you really step back and look at it, the parallel is absolutely stunning. Human digestion perfectly mirrors the amoeba's journey. Ingestion, digestion, absorption, assimilation, and egestion. We evolved incredibly complex specialized organs to do the job, but at the end of the day, we're still running the exact same 5-step biological playbook as a single-celled organism.
Whether you're a plant converting raw sunlight, an amoeba deploying false feet, or a human breaking down a complex meal, we are all bound by the exact same relentless drive for fuel. It really makes you wonder, if we share this essential biological rhythm with a microscopic blob, what other invisible processes bind every living thing on Earth together? Next time you sit down for a meal, ask yourself, how much of the natural world is sitting down to eat right alongside you? Keep asking questions and stay curious.